everyone. It's Michael Shermer. Before we start the show today, I wanted to tell you about our big upcoming event here in Santa Barbara, December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday night, we're doing an open house right here in the office where I'm recording all this. I got a food truck coming and adult beverages. Going to be big fun. We're all just going to hang out. And then Saturday and Sunday, I have some terrific guests coming. I have Michael Schellenberger, who's going to be a live podcast guest. We're going to record it live at the hotel at the Hilton Beachside Resort, right on Cabrillo here in Santa Barbara. So give them a call, reserve your room, and go to skeptic.com, and right on the top banner, you'll see the conference. Be sure to sign up before it sells out. Michael Schellenberger is one of the most interesting people working today, independent journalist. He ran for governor of California. He works on homelessness. He works on nuclear power. He works on the environment, and most importantly, he works on social media. He was one of the guys that got the Twitter files from Elon and went through and found all the interesting things that were going on at Twitter before Elon bought it. So we'll be talking about all those issues and more, and getting your feedback. That is, these live podcast recordings will have a good portion of the time spent interacting with you, the audience. We're going to do that also Sunday morning with Jared Diamond, the great Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collapse, and so forth. He's coming up from LA. He's going to spend the part of the day with us, and we're going to do another live recording, podcast recording, which I'll be in conversation with him. And then again, your dialogue with Jared will also be recorded and posted on the show here. And then finally, I got Pete Boghossian coming, who's going to do a street epistemology with all of us. That is to say, he's going to see what it would take to change your mind on various issues. For example, I'm guessing most of the people coming to the conference are the same people who watch this show, read the Skeptic magazine and so on. They're probably atheists or agnostics. So what would it take for you to be a theist? Okay, so Pete's going to try a little street epistemology on us, which will be big fun. Go to skeptic.com, just click on that banner across the top, sign up before it sells out. It's going to be a terrific, big fun. Oh, and then Sunday afternoon, for those who can't make it to the open house Friday night, we'll do it again here. Another food truck coming, adult beverages, going to be big fun. See you then. My guest today is Garrett Graff. Here's his new book, UFO. Garrett has spent nearly 2 decades covering politics, technology, and national security. The former editor of Politico magazine and a contributor to Wired and CNN, he has written for publications from Esquire to Rolling Stone to the New York Times. And today he serves as the director for cyber initiatives at the Aspen Institute. Graff is the author of multiple books, including the FBI history, The Threat Matrix, Raven Rock, about the government's Cold War doomsday plans. I read that book. That was a great book. And the New York Times bestseller, The Only Plane in the Sky. I'm guessing that's about 9/11. I haven't read that one yet. And Watergate, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History. Garrett, nice to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks so much for having me today.
The new book, as you've been staring at here as I was reading his bio on the back, is UFO, the inside story of the U.S. government's search for alien life here and out there. I have to tell you, I have a bookcase full of books on UFOs, and yours, I swear, I'm not just saying this because you're on the show. Really, it's the best book I've read on the whole subject. And, that's 500 pages of 75 years of history. There's a lot to tell. And it's such a perfect blend of history, kind of cultural, mythological, narratives that run through a lot of these stories. You don't really pass judgment on whether these things represent aliens or whatever they represent, which I like. It's a pure journalistic, objective look at the story. And that's rare. Most of the books I have are either pro-UFOs as aliens or they're debunking books, like the kind I write. And, so I really appreciate it. Also, all the Cold War history, a lot of it I had forgotten about, going all the way back to the 50s and so on. So let's just start with how you came to write this book compared to the history of Watergate and national security secrets and Raven Rock and all the stuff you've been writing about. How does the UFO story fit into that?
Yeah, it's a very natural question, and thank you for the kind words. It's nice to know that the book connected with someone who knows a lot about this subject. For me, this book is more closely related to the rest of the work that I do than I think a lot of people would think at first glance. For me, this book began in December 2020. John Brennan, who was he was then the former CIA director, had given an interview to a journalist in DC that I know and like, Tyler Cowen, where John Brennan said, and I'm paraphrasing here, yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff up there that we don't know what it is, and it puzzles me. And John Brennan, at that point, he was a career intelligence officer. He had, in 2020, had been for most of the previous decade, the CIA director or the White House Homeland Security advisor, sort of sitting at the pinnacle of the U.S. government and national security apparatus. And I figured there aren't too many puzzles in John Brennan's life. If he has a question when he wakes up in the morning, he is able to task, tens of thousands of intelligence officers and analysts, signals intercept networks, surveillance systems, satellite imagery, all can try to answer any question that he has. And so if he thinks that there's sort of something to the UFO, what the government now calls UAPs, which we can sort of talk about, why that change happened and why it matters, then that's probably a subject worth thinking about a little bit more seriously. And of course, what you mentioned some of this in your introduction. When you dive into the history of this, we sort of try to tell these two stories separately. Normally, there's like kooky UFO people here on Earth, and then there are like serious scientists and astronomers like Carl Sagan who are looking for intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. And we sort of try to tell those stories as totally separate, I think, in a lot of the literature and history. And of course, they're not separate. A very big part of the answer to whether aliens are visiting Earth is whether there are aliens at all. And so you're sort of left, I think, or I tried to sort of weave these two threads and stories together over the last 80 years. And what you end up with is a story that I think is not really about the aliens at all. It's really about the humans. It's really about, our evolving understanding of science. It's about our evolving anxieties. I mean, sort of the whole UFO phenomenon basically grows out of the early stages of the Cold War, when our government isn't worried about aliens. They're worried that these flying saucers that people are reporting are actually secret Soviet craft being built by kidnapped Nazi rocket scientists. And, that this sort of whole thing at the biggest level is really this story of humanity's attempt to understand our cosmic context. Are we alone is in some ways the most fundamental and transformative question of human existence. And that's really what this book is about, and trying to understand that at a sort of geopolitical level, at a technological level, at a scientific level. And really, one of the things that surprised me as someone who was really coming at this as a hard national security, politics writer, is a spiritual story and a sort of a spiritual quest for human understanding. And then, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of this over the course of our conversation, where sort of your work and this book overlap as well a lot, is that the second half of this book is really in some weird way a sequel to my Watergate book. That the second half of this book, the second half of the flying saucer UFO story, is about the public's collapsing trust in government and trust in institutions, and sort of the rise of the dark conspiracy theories in American politics. I think in many ways that sort of, listeners probably don't really understand. The deep state isn't born with Donald Trump. The deep state sort of appears really first in UFO conspiracies, and it sort of comes into the fabric of American political life through these dark UFO conspiracies of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s.
Yeah, that's a nice summary. I love the whole subject of UFOs and aliens as mythic creatures, or like almost a religious, spiritual quest to know that there's something out there that's more powerful and moral, better than us, that knows we're here, which is very much like religion. But when I suggest such an idea to UFO believers or even SETI scientists, they're not having it. They don't think this is a myth. They think it's real. I mean, well, SETI scientists don't think we've made contact yet, but they wouldn't be searching if it was just some mythological, religious-like impulse. They think, it's entirely possible they're out there, so we should be searching. And the ufologists, pretty much to a person, think we are already being visited. There is no Fermi paradox. Where is everybody? They're here, right? But at some point, you start to bump up against epistemological barriers like government secrets. My conspiracy book, I wrote about, the kind of underlying rationality to believing in conspiracy theories, because there are a lot of conspiracies, Watergate being the obvious one. But, you mentioned Operation Paperclip, where the government was getting, Nazi scientists to come on our side before the Russians got them. Well, that really did happen. And we really were generating top secret planes and spacecraft and chemical weapons and biological weapons in secret. So it's not irrational to think there is a deep state and they're doing stuff we don't know about. And to throw UFOs in there, that's completely reasonable.
And I think actually one of the things that I come away with in my research is there absolutely is a government cover-up of the government's knowledge and understanding and beliefs about UFOs and UAPs. Full stop, period. There is a government cover-up. I don't think, though, it is the cover-up that people think that it is, that sort of the true believers think that it is. And I think that for sort of a couple of different reasons. One, there are sort of clear, you could almost say legitimate, but that's a debatable term, reasons that the government is covering up its full knowledge and scope of UFOs. For one thing, a big chunk of UFOs and UAPs, and they're slightly different, but I use the terms interchangeably, for the purposes of conversation here. A big chunk of UFOs turn out to be our own government's secret technologies and operations and, things in development. We now understand actually that perhaps as much as 50% of the recorded UFO sightings of the 1950s were the U-2 spy plane, which was a legitimate UFO. It was a plane that didn't look like any plane that anyone had ever seen before, flying at an altitude that planes didn't fly at speeds that planes weren't known to fly. That's about as UFO as a UFO gets. And the government sort of embraced the idea of UFOs in the 1950s, in part to hide the programs that it was running itself. And we know that sort of those same things are happening today, with sort of more modern generations of technology. We also know that some chunk of UFOs and UAPs in the modern context are adversaries' advanced technologies being tested against us. These are Chinese drones, Russian drones, Iranian drones. Maybe Tony Stark is up there in a mountain laboratory, building something that, we don't know about yet. And the government is enormously protective of its own sensor systems, sort of what it detects, what it finds, what it hears. And it doesn't actually want to give the full knowledge of what it detects and what it sees, because that is, information that is useful to the adversaries in developing this technology. We received an important reminder of sort of the scope of the U.S. government surveillance networks this summer with the implosion of the Titan submersible. The sort of, scientific and Coast Guard community searched for, whatever that was, a week or so this summer when the Titan submersible disappeared. And then it came out later that the U.S. Navy had heard the moment of the implosion in real time when the sub imploded, and had basically known, in real time that everyone aboard was killed in an implosion as part of the U.S. military's, anti-submarine sub-sea surveillance systems, which, again, they don't like to talk about. And it took a while for that to come out. So, those are sort of your like legitimate reasons for the government cover up right off the top. But then you get to what to me is sort of the core of the government cover up, which is, I don't think that government has any idea what these UFOs actually are, what a big chunk of these UAPs actually turn out to be. And that the government is, in fact, covering up its ignorance of UFOs, not its knowledge of UFOs, because it is an incredibly uncomfortable position for a bureaucracy, particularly a bureaucracy designed to protect Americans, to say something as fundamentally humble as what John Brennan said, which is, there's something out there, we don't know what it is, and it puzzles us. And, we spend $60 billion a year on the U.S. intelligence system, $800 billion a year on national defense, $100 billion on homeland security. And so, you're talking about like a $900 billion, $1 trillion a year enterprise. And for them to say like, oh, hey, there's a bunch of weird stuff up there, and hope someday someone really figures out what it is. Like, that's a really bad place for the government to actually be forced to say something like that. And so I think you get this sort of knee-jerk obfuscation to cover up the ignorance that the government actually has on this subject.
Yeah, it's like our principle of conspiracism: never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence or chance. Or in this case, just ignorance. Just, we don't know.
Yes.
Right. And if your citizens are paying you $900 billion a year to protect the homeland, and you don't know what's going on, and we're being told by pilots on 60 Minutes, oh, we see these things all the time. All the time? What? Yeah, so now, since you deal in government secrets and so forth in so many different areas, here's one line of thinking that I had on this. We do find out about government secrets. We do know about the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird. We know what goes on now, more or less, at Area 51. Found out about Watergate, Iran-Contra. These things come out. Now, ufologists say, oh, no. The government can really keep secrets even for 75 years. And I said, but we know about the Manhattan Project, on and on and on. What's your sense of to what extent the government could be keeping secrets of whatever it is, Russian technology or Chinese technology or even aliens? Or we would know by now with WikiLeaks and all the government secrets that are exposed through whistleblowers and so forth.
Yeah. I think I end up basically where you are, which is the challenge for me with government conspiracies is they presuppose a level of competence that is not on display in the rest of the work that the government does. And, that's a little bit of a, joking pejorative response, but it's also not, which is, I just don't believe that the government is capable of keeping a secret at scale like this for any meaningful period of time. And let me give you sort of a couple of examples to sort of unpack that and back that up. If you think just about this year and the Discord leaks we saw earlier this year, the core inner sanctum of the U.S. intelligence and military bureaucracy right now is, the sort of biggest, most closely held secret that we have is our own knowledge of Ukraine's ability to fight Russia. There's sort of nothing, sort of tactically day to day that is more important as a secret to the U.S. government right now than that. It's important because of our allies, our relationships, our intelligence sources inside Ukraine. It's important in terms of, helping Ukraine, defeating Russia. It's important for all sorts of different reasons. We were not able to keep secret the U.S. government's briefings to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which were being read by a random Massachusetts Air National Guardsman who was photographing them and posting them to a video game server for a year before anyone noticed. And you're telling me sort of that's the demonstrated capability of the government to keep secrets. And yet you have a conspiracy around UFOs that surely it would employ thousands of people over decades, that not only has no one actually sort of leaked anything or left anything, written a tell-all memoir or gone on, 60 Minutes afterwards with firsthand knowledge, but that they've never left a briefcase full of UFO secrets in an Uber or a taxi cab, or accidentally mailed, documents to the wrong person. I'm already hard at work on my next book, which is a D-Day history, which will come out next June. And, Operation Overlord, the biggest, most important secret that the U.S. government had, they had 6, 8, 10 complete breaches of secrecy in the 6 or 8 months that was underway. I mean, one guy literally accidentally mailed a copy of the invasion plans to his mom in Chicago. One officer got drunk and accidentally started talking about the invasion at a cocktail party. Another officer literally did leave a briefcase behind on a bus that he's chasing after down the street, trying to recover the invasion documents. And that's one operation in one 6-8 month period, that actually the secrecy around it held really, really well. The Germans never did learn when Operation Overlord was going to happen. And to me, I just don't see the capability to keep any meaningful secrets about this program over a long period of time. Now, that is not to say that there aren't secrets, that there are not sort of puzzles and mysteries. Sort of one of the things that, this summer we had this UFO whistleblower, David Grush, who sort of came out with what to me was sort of a very classic type of UFO whistleblower conspiracy, which is, I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but, here's what people told me. Here's a buddy who worked in the program who said he saw the thing. And, in ufology, there's a term for this. They're called folk tales. Not folk tales, but folk tales. Friend of a friend tales. And, UFO whistleblowers going back 40, 50 years have been sort of a steady stream of folk tales, of people saying, I have a buddy in the service who told me, this thing, that thing, the other thing. And David Grush says, look, we've got this secret UFO crash retrieval program, and we have recovered unknown technology that the government thinks is of extraterrestrial origin. Every single bit of that is probably true. It doesn't necessarily end up with the conclusion that he and a lot of the news media leapt to at the end of it. So let's break that down. The US government does have a secret UFO crash retrieval program. We've had it for 100 years. It works at ASIC now, the Air and Space Intelligence Center, that used to be ATIC, the Air Technical Intelligence Center. Go all the way back to World War I. It was started as the Foreign Technology Division of the Army Air Corps. And what their job is they go around and collect UFOs that crash. Now, what those UFOs mostly are enemy aircraft. This is how during World War II we ended up with Japanese Zeros and German Messerschmitts. This is how during the Cold War we got our hands on Soviet MiGs, was we have a team of talented, intelligent professionals who race around the world to crash sites of suspicious things and hoover up all the wreckage. So that part of the story is true. Second part of the story, I'll also believe is true, which is that the US government has recovered things that we don't know what it is. That's probably a huge chunk of what the UFO crash retrieval team picks up. They're picking up technology all the time that is, Chinese drones they've never seen before, Russian drones they've never seen before, Iranian drones that they've never seen before, Israeli drones they've probably never seen before. This is the whole reason we have this division, is to go out and find, the literal UFOs. Well, I'll even go so far as to believe there's someone on that team who's seen a piece of wreckage that they've collected who says that doesn't look like anything that's been built on Earth. That's a very different statement or conclusion than the way that people sort of have interpreted what David Grush was saying, which is, that there was like a briefing to the president in the Situation Room where they say, we have 17 intelligence agencies that assess with a high degree of confidence we have recovered extraterrestrial technology. We have a crash retrieval program. I'll bet they've recovered stuff they don't know what it is. And maybe there's a dude on it who says there's some extraterrestrial stuff on it. That's different to me, So like when you break down a sort of story, a folk tale like David Grush, every bit of that story can be true or mostly true, and it doesn't yet lead to the conclusion that people sort of naturally end up with, which is, there's that special tank under Area 51 that Bill Pullman goes to see in Independence Day, where there's some aliens and a couple of crashed spacecraft.
That's great. Yeah, that was perfectly said. I agree with all that. Because I'm always asked, do you think Grush is lying, or is he telling the truth and we have contact with aliens? Well, how about a third story, which is he's honestly reporting what people told him. What people tell him is what they think they saw, but they don't know. How would I know what I'm looking at if I just have a little piece of metal? It's easy to say, well, I don't know what it was. Gosh, I've never seen anything on Earth like it. Well, that's entirely possible. You probably haven't seen everything there is on Earth. Before you say something is out of this world, first make sure it's not in this world. Another one of our Skeptic principles. So then the public leaps immediately to extraterrestrial then. So let's just think about the way you've described this. There's no possible way the Russians or the Chinese or whoever could be very far ahead of us technologically, because we would know about it. We steal each other's secrets. We spy on each other. Scientists read each other's papers and journals, and even like private companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft and so forth, they have all these secrets that they keep and intellectual property rights, and they have entire law firms that just sue each other companies for stealing their secrets. And yet all of our computers, all of our phones, they're all pretty much the same. No one has like a century advantage over some other company, and so there's no way the Russians could have done this, or we could do it without them knowing, because we all spy on each other, right? So then that leaves us with, well, it's just some terrestrial thing and we don't know what it is, or we're just not going to tell you because it's a national secret. I've kind of fantasized about someone like Marco Rubio finally getting access to the warehouse that Grush was talking about, where all this stuff is. And he goes in there and they go, look, Marco, this is version 3.5 of our drone. Oh, right, I see. So I can't go out there and tell everybody. No, you can't tell everybody. Then he comes back out and goes, there's nothing to see here, folks. He's lying. He's covering up. He's part of the deep state. So at some point, it must be frustrating. It is frustrating to just hit that wall where we just can't know. And one of the things, listening to your book, I listened to all 18 hours of it. It was so much fun. These conversations I have on the Galileo Project every Friday, the Zoom project, they are indistinguishable from the conversations you write about in the 1950s that people were having about what, all these UAPs, back then UFOs, represent. It's astonishing. Why can't we get to the core of it? What the hell is going on? It's so frustrating.
Yeah. So I think that, in some ways, this is a divergent story, right? That, when you go back across 80 years, the evidence sort of dwindles and diminishes that there's intelligent life visiting Earth, while at the same time, the scientific astronomical, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the SETI work, becomes, I think, in every decade, sort of ever more sure that the odds are on the side of the aliens somewhere. That there is, almost certainly life elsewhere in the universe. Probably actually a lot of life in a lot of places. And that there's probably even intelligent life. But that it's probably too far away for us to meaningfully have contact with it. There's a high likelihood it has come and gone long before we got here. Avi Loeb, the Harvard astronomy chair, who's the head of the Galileo project, he talks about how, Hollywood has done this sort of enormous disservice to us in the contact narratives, sort of the idea of, getting these strange messages from outer space, or having the, alien warships, appear over the White House, to conquer Earth. The chances anyone knows that we are here or pays any special attention to us are vanishingly slim. We are probably, by the sort of odds and chances and math of the universe, a remarkably average or sub-average civilization in a sort of average star that would not attract any noticeable attention from anyone. And when Carl Sagan, who was, sort of simultaneously the sort of arch skeptic of UFOs here, while being the sort of driving proponent of SETI work out there, he actually argued aliens probably visit Earth every 100,000 years. His argument is not aliens don't come here. It's that aliens sort of stop by so infrequently that the chances that they were here last Tuesday buzzing the USS Nimitz are probably effectively zero. That that they probably stop by here on their way to or from something that is more interesting to them, and randomly chance on us every so often. And And Avi Loeb's argument is, the proof that we are probably going to get of intelligent civilizations elsewhere is not a spacecraft arriving over the White House or, some detailed message, picked up by one of our radio telescopes. It's basically the equivalent. We're likely to see as our first evidence the equivalent of an empty plastic bag sort of blowing through the solar system at some point, sort of some piece of effectively extraterrestrial interstellar trash that is, defunct or eons old or just literal trash, sort of passing through our solar system. That, and that to me is sort of fascinating and fun to think about in a different way. Sort of what would it look like? What would it mean to us, to find, a plastic bag from Alpha Centauri, blowing through Earth, Earth's atmosphere or our solar system someday.
Yeah, Avi makes the point that if the Voyager spacecraft ever managed to accidentally hit a planet and somehow not completely burn up, it would mostly burn up. There wouldn't be much left. And it would just be at the bottom of the ocean, and it would just be some debris field of little droplets. And that's what he went in search of last summer down in Papua New Guinea at the bottom of the ocean. He's just dredging up these little spherules that are like just a millimeter in size. And I was kind of hoping he'd bring up the dashboard of the Millennium Falcon or something. It's like, oh, there it is. It's the dial. It shows how fast it goes. It wouldn't be anything like that. Much less that, they somehow traverse the vast distances of interstellar space and they keep crashing in New Mexico for some reason, right? They can't seem to land. And that they'd only be like 10 years ahead of us so we can back engineer silicon chips to make computers. I mean, these are just so ridiculous.
And that, the one of the really fun things in this world is, the presumption of mediocrity, that Earth is, not only not an advanced civilization or a particularly intelligent one, but one that is probably just sort of stunningly average for the universe. And, that any civilization that is able to, deliver trash or more meaningful contact to our solar system is probably going to be, light years, metaphorically speaking, ahead of us technologically as well. And that, again, this is where you sort of bump up against some of the, spiritual questions, which is, if we intersect with a civilization that is, 1 million or 2 million years more advanced than we are, that probably ends up looking to us, like a lot of the attributes that we currently attribute to God. And, it would look like, it would in some ways be as shocking, if not more shocking, than, trying to go back to the, Neolithic times and show a caveman an iPhone.
Yeah. Didn't remember this was only invented in 2007. I mean, it's just nothing.
Right. And by the way, like, when we sort of talk about what UFOs and UAPs actually are, I think that our answer lies in that same category, which is we need to be incredibly humble about what we know and what we don't know. And to me, when you sort of get into the heart of what UFOs and UAPs are, once you rule out all of the super obvious stuff that's like, oh, that was that was the planet Venus, that was a SpaceX satellite launch, sort of all of the things that day to day get confused, you're still left with this core of things that are truly unexplainable to us, things that known physics and known aviation cannot explain. Historically, across 80 years, that's always been true. There's always been this chunk that is truly unexplainable. And, that is, somewhere between 5 and 20% of all sightings. And to me, that's the really interesting set of questions. That's the really interesting core. And that's probably, in my mind, 4 different things. A pie chart made up of 4 slices of as yet unknown proportions. The first category is atmospheric, meteorological, and astronomical phenomenon that we just really don't understand yet. There's a lot in astronomy and weather and atmospheric science that we don't really understand particularly well. Plasma and ball lightning and things like that we're sort of still trying to figure out.
So just on that one, the Foo Fighters from World War II, not the band. Do you think the ball lightning, plasma physics is the explanation, or are they just shooting in the dark, making something up because we don't know what it is? This is a phenomenon of basically sort of light balls that were chasing around U.S. Allied fighter planes, mostly in Europe, a little bit in the Pacific theater during World War II. And that's what I sort of think that ends up being. It was sort of poorly documented enough that we may never really know, but that seems like a highly likely set of possibilities. The second category, I think of what UFOs and UAPs end up being, is adversarial technology being tested against us. This we know is true. When the Pentagon, one of the few things that the Pentagon has said since it sort of restarted its UAP program in the last couple of years, is that work has helped to uncover a heretofore unknown trans-medium Chinese drone, which is a Chinese drone that comes out of the water and transitions to flight, which is a technology that the U.S. did not know China possessed prior to discovering it through these UAP sightings. So we know some chunk of it is that adversarial technology. The third category is what we ended up with a Chinese spy balloon in February, which is there's just a bunch of weird stuff floating around up in the sky that we're not paying attention to on a day-to-day basis, and that the government is not paying attention to on a day-to-day basis. Turns out if you sort of dial the NORAD radar slightly differently than they're normally set, they start picking up all kinds of junk up in the sky, which is how, in the course of basically like that one weekend in February, we shot down 3 UFOs, over Lake Huron and the Yukon territories, and put these like $250,000 missiles from the most advanced fighter platforms in the world up against what turned out to be, a weather balloon from an Ohio hobbyist club that, no one knew was floating up there, that no one was paying attention to until NORAD decided it was now a UFO. So then you get to what to me is the most interesting category of UFO sightings, which is sort of the fourth category that is physics that we don't understand. And Avi Loeb, again, sort of makes the point that we should be really humble about how little physics we actually understand. The entire history, the entire human understanding of quantum physics and relativity, occurred in the lifetime of the oldest person on Earth who died earlier this year. This woman in France who, during her lifetime, we discovered everything that we know about quantum physics and relativity. So think of what we're going to learn about physics in the next 100 years. Think of what we're going to learn about it in 500 years or 1,000 years. This summer, for the first time, we found gravitational waves
moving through space that bend space-time. We'd sort of thought that they existed, but we only actually discovered them for the first time this summer. So that fourth category, I think, is going to be incredibly weird stuff. These could be, these are things, all, by the way, far beyond my understanding as a journalist of the physics involved in any of this. But, parallel dimensions, time travel, wormholes, all sorts of weird things there, all of which would be sort of fascinating and interesting and, world-changing, and still could stop short of the answer being aliens visiting Earth on UFOs. There's sort of categories of things that could be unfolding there that would blow our minds and still have what are basically terrestrial explanations.
Yeah, I find the whole subject of anomalies and how scientists treat anomalies versus how the public treats them, which is to say, an anomaly is whatever I want it to be, my favorite conspiracy theory or
right.
aliens or whatever. Whereas most scientists will go, well, I don't know, we can't explain everything. Let's just assign it to some graduate student to figure out, or maybe they'll figure it out in a century from now. I always like to use Leslie Kean's list of the possible explanations, where she says 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings. But listeners, Leslie Kean is a big pro-ufologist. Even she says 90 to 95% of these are weather balloons, flares, sky lanterns, planes flying in formation, secret military aircraft, birds reflecting the sun, planes reflecting the sun, blimps, helicopters, the planet Venus or Mars, meteors or meteorites, space junk, satellites, swamp gas, spinning eddies, sundogs, ball lightning, ice crystals, reflected light off clouds, lights on the ground, or lights reflected on a cockpit window, temperature inversions, hole punch clouds, and the list goes on. So what do you do with the remaining? And, nothing. You don't have to do anything. And this is always the problem. It's like Graham Hancock in his ancient civilization hypothesis. You can always find some weird little thing in an archaeological dig. What is that? And if you can't explain it, then this supports my theory. Well, maybe, but maybe we just can't explain everything.
Yes, and at the same time, I think the U.S. government should care more than it does. That one of the things that, this comes back to sort of what we were talking about, if the government cover up of ignorance, not knowledge. One of the things that does puzzle me as you go back across the 80 years of this is how little interest the U.S. government has ever had to actually get to the bottom of it.
Okay, but let me stop you right there. So this is your field. How do you know that they don't care, but they do, and they're just letting us think they don't care? It's what do they call it? A disinformation program or something?
Yeah. Because I think we would have solved more of these mysteries by now. That we, the government, the government's like anything. You show me your budget and I'll tell you your priorities. And you look at the history of these UFO efforts and, they're rounding errors. They are, 2 guys, 3 guys, 3 guys and a secretary. There are entire decades where the U.S. government does not have a active sort of UFO study unit at all. Anywhere in government, there's this story that I tell in the book of the Reagan years, where this sort of Pentagon official, basically just sort of his own interest, is like, this is right as Roswell is sort of starting to gin back up as a thing, and we can talk about Roswell if you want, because I think it's sort of fascinating to debunk it and show how we know it's not
sure.
real.
Yeah.
But this guy sort of sets out in the Reagan Pentagon to find the secret government UFO program. And so he just sort of starts calling the people who would presumably be running it. And every one of them says, oh, actually, that's a good question. I would love to find the secret government UFO program. And they start having meetings, over several years where they sort of bring together all of the people who sort of should know where the government's secret UFO program is being run and sort of try to brainstorm who else could be running it and where it lives. And they're unable to find it. And they sort of all conclude at the end of the day, the government doesn't have this program at all that we sort of all thought someone else was doing. And, now you look at sort of the government's efforts to sort of restart interest in this, which I think is great. The sort of whole push to rename these things unidentified anomalous phenomenon, UAPs, to try to decrease the giggle factor and destigmatize talk about UFOs, I think is really important and really admirable, because for all of the reasons that we talked about atmospheric science and meteorological science and physics and astronomy, there could be a ton of really interesting answers in that, 1%, 5%, 10% of unexplainable sightings that could be really useful and interesting for us to understand and solve, even if the answer doesn't end up being aliens.
Talk about for just a second as an intro to Roswell. Didn't Clinton and Obama both say they were going to try to get to the bottom of the UFO problem secrets?
Yes. Clinton really did, make some effort. We actually know a lot about what we know about the official government line on Roswell, because of the Clinton sort of declassification efforts. But Roswell to me is just this great story. And I spent a lot of time on it in the book, because you sort of see all of the aspects of how these stories get twisted and misunderstood over and across decades. Roswell occurs July 1947, early July. And this, just a couple of weeks into what is really the start of the flying saucer age, the sort of the dawn of the modern flying saucer age is June 1947. An Idaho businessman named Kenneth Arnold sees what he thinks are flying saucer-like objects moving at incredible speed over the Cascades near Mount Rainier in the Pacific Northwest, while he is flying across the Pacific Northwest on a business trip in his own plane. He lands, talks about this. It creates this sort of national fever. And over the course of that summer, flying saucers, and they're all saucers. They're all saucers at that point. Are reported in something like 34 states across the country. About 2 weeks into this, a rancher named Mac Brazel comes into the city of Roswell, and he tells the local sheriff, I found some weird wreckage on my ranch. Sheriff says it's probably military. Go over to the Roswell Air Force Base. The Roswell Air Force Base at that point is one of the most important military facilities in the entire world. It is the only nuclear-equipped fighting force in the entire world. The silver-plated B-29s that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the base commander is actually one of the backup pilots from the atomic bombings. I mean, he is an incredibly serious, incredibly accomplished pilot. He sees this wreckage, and he sort of has, like, big career eyes. He's like, great news! We have found one of these flying saucers that everyone is talking about. Tells his public affairs officer to immediately put out a press release saying, we found one of these flying saucers. they put out the press release. They put the wreckage on a plane to the headquarters of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas. And there, sort of higher ups immediately look at this and say, actually, this is a weather balloon, not a flying saucer. And so there's sort of this, like, the entire sort of arc and rise and fall of Roswell takes place in like a 4, 5, 6 hour window in the course of an afternoon as this press release goes out and then the government retracts it. And of course, that's sort of the gist of the whole cover-up, right? Is that the government itself told us it recovered a flying saucer and then told us they didn't recover a flying saucer. So, of course, they're lying. What's interesting is in the world of sort of flying saucers and UFOs, Roswell is immediately forgotten in this summer of flying saucers. And for like 30, 40 years, there's no attention paid to Roswell whatsoever. To me, the most convincing proof that we have that there was nothing recovered at Roswell, nothing extraterrestrial recovered at Roswell, is the fact of the most famous conversation to take place about extraterrestrials ever, which is the conversation that gives rise to what we now call the Fermi paradox. This sort of moment when, in 1950, Enrico Fermi and Edward Teller, sort of these two, towering physicists, for any of the listeners who saw Oppenheimer over the summer, you know exactly who I'm talking about here. The key minds behind the Manhattan Project, the key minds behind, sort of so much of the sort of nuclear apparatus of the country, are talking at Los Alamos over lunch about the possibility of aliens. And Enrico Fermi sort of says, where is everybody? Sort of his argument basically being, if there's life elsewhere, why don't we see it a lot? If life is as common as we think it is, why have we never seen it? To me, this is the conversation that that Roswell didn't recover anything. Because the thing that people miss, the thing that people don't think about, is there's sort of this belief that if Roswell had recovered flying spacecraft, they would have ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is sort of the headquarters of Air Force intelligence in Dayton, Ohio. No, they would have gone to Los Alamos. Los Alamos was the place where we did the most secret work that the U.S. government did, where we had the smartest minds and the smartest people. And if in 1950 there were 10 people in the entire country who knew that we had recovered a downed spacecraft or alien bodies in 1947, Enrico Fermi and Edward Teller would be 2 of those 10. That's true whether that number is 6 people, 10 people, 100 people. There's just no way that secret exists in 1950 without Edward Teller and Enrico Fermi being a key part of any conversation about recovered alien spacecraft or bodies from Roswell in 1947. And it's just this like little interesting piece that you sort of, everyone sort of tells these stories, Roswell, Fermi paradox, but until you put them together, you don't actually realize that they actually sort of, one disproves the other.
Yeah, that is the best explanation I've ever heard just now and read in your book. So to all you ufologists out there that are banking on Roswell, read that chapter. And also you make the point, as we have in Skeptic, that Roswell didn't even get on the UFO map amongst ufologists until the 1980s, when Stan Friedman and a few others started poking around. And then, because there was some big survey in the 60s, I think, about like the 500 top UFO sightings of the past quarter century, and Roswell wasn't even on the list. So it's really myth making, at its best. On the saucers thing, all of a sudden everyone is seeing saucers. What are they seeing? What's going on here? Okay, so here's one idea. In cognitive psychology, there's this thing called priming. You prime people to see something or hear something, which works if the information is poor or ambiguous. You can't quite make out what's going on. My favorite example is I play for you Stairway to Heaven backwards. You don't hear much of anything. But if I put the words on the screen of what it says, you hear it quite clearly. But that only works if you can't quite see what's going on, right? So Kenneth Arnold says, they skip like saucers, and all of a sudden it gets transduced into they were saucers. And so now what's going on? People are seeing stuff. They're looking up more than maybe they used to look up. They're seeing whatever they're seeing, the flock of geese or whatever, planet Venus. And what? Their brain is reinterpreting it as saucer-like because they've been primed through the media.
So, yes, there's also actually a much more simple explanation, which sort of only comes out later, which is British astronomers figure out in 1948, 1949, that, again, you have to sort of remember how early a lot of technology, a lot of astronomy is in the 1940s. That actually 47, 48 saw one of the biggest meteor showers that we have ever seen. And one of the things that people did not realize until then was you could see daytime meteors. And that was like a literal surprise as they sort of discover that in 47, 48. And so at the most simple possible explanation for this is a lot of people that summer saw a really big meteor shower, including perhaps Kenneth Arnold himself, which, by the way, would have looked like the flying saucers a lot of people were reporting. Sort of big glowing balls moving at, fantastic, unthinkable speeds through the sky. And that the possibility that sort of the entire flying saucer age was born because of a confusion around unexplained and unexpected meteor storm in the summer of 1947 actually bears a lot of possibility.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the parts of your book where you kind of track different phases of ufology, the different flaps or waves of UFO sightings, as they're kind of associated or correlated with what was going on during the Cold War, or with government secrets, or with spy planes and so forth. So talk a little bit about that, the interaction of, I guess, perceptions of what people think they see and what was going on scientifically, technologically, Cold War politically.
Yeah. So there's sort of a category of witnesses through all of this who, to me, are sort of the most interesting witnesses. And you sort of said this at the start in the introduction. I sort of come into this subject as a general skeptic. I don't leave it as a believer, but I'm, open to the possibility of there being sort of interesting and weird answers in here. And to me, those are sort of encapsulated by what to me are sort of the most intriguing category of witnesses through the flying saucer age, which, again, there's, huge chunks of these witnesses that you can sort of dismiss on the one hand as, you saw Venus, you saw Mars, you saw, 6 planes flying in formation at night, and it looked like one giant black triangle. And then there's, sort of another category of witnesses that I think, at least for me, I'm easily able to dismiss, who are the sort of what were known as the original contactees and sort of their, philosophical and ideological descendants, who are sort of the people who are like, I have an alien who comes by every Thursday and we have tea and scones together. Like that to me, at least until we have stronger evidence, I'm easily able to dismiss sort of that end of the spectrum. Where I get sort of stuck, where I get intrigued, are people like Lonnie Zamora, who is, in 1964, a local police officer in Socorro, New Mexico. This is a town actually sort of coincidentally not that far from Roswell, sort of close to the White Sands Proving Grounds, which is, a very secret military testing facility there. And he's chasing a speeder on his way out of town into the desert one day, sees sort of off a little ways in the distance in the desert what he thinks is a overturned car. So he turns off the road and goes off to sort of try to help this, what he thinks is a person in distress. It's a bumpy desert. He's sort of coming up and down, sort of coming in and out of view of this thing. It's white. He sees two figures standing next to it. Not full-grown adults, not kids, sort of big kids, small teenager kind of size. As he gets closer, they get into the craft and the craft flies away. And he's really shaken up by this. He sort of runs away from the craft as it's flying away. He loses his glasses. There's a New Mexico state trooper who pulls up on the scene a couple of minutes later. He is really he sees that Lonnie Zamora is really sort of shaken up by this kind of experience. There appears to be some type of physical evidence of a craft having landed in the space where Lonnie Zamora says something happened. And then Lonnie Zamora goes on and has sort of a totally normal life. He doesn't, this craft doesn't visit him, every third Thursday. He doesn't, turn out to see UFOs, every year for the rest of his life on his birthday. He just has this one experience where there's, some solid documentary evidence that something happened to him. He has no apparent reason to make the story up. He's led sort of a totally normal life before and a totally normal life after. And, here we are, 50, 60 years later, and there's not a single thing that we have seen come out of sort of declassified government archives that looks anything like the thing that he saw. The sort of simplest explanation is right in the heart of the Cold War, or the Cold War space race. He's near the White Sands Proving Grounds. Maybe he stumbled on some type of, Apollo effort to test a moonlander type craft. And that's a NASA program or an Air Force program that, they built this secret craft and it flew away. It's a very simple and reasonable explanation for what he saw in that moment, in that time, in 1964. But we've never seen any craft emerge from the Apollo program or, the declassified archives 50, 60 years later that looks or acts anything like the thing that he saw. And so to me, there are a handful of stories. They're not the dominant threads of the UFO narrative. They're not, they're not things that you see often, but there are enough stories like that, sort of witnesses like Lonnie Zamora, that to me say there is something here, that there is something worth studying. There is a mystery worth solving. And I think our government should be more interested in what that answer actually is.
Yeah. Well, that's why I support the Galileo project. If the government's not going to do it, then private people could do it. And, Avi's getting some big donors to support it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably just going to refine the number of anomalies down. It'll be just like 1% rather than 5 to 10%. But still, probably never going to explain everything. You're always going to have the one-off events like what you just described, and that's not the only one. What do you do with those? I guess at some point we just have to say, I don't know, and just leave it.
Well, and by the way, like I think the brilliance of the Galileo project is Avi Loeb's sort of hypothesis is not the right word, or strategy maybe, that humans are terrible witnesses, that we should just sort of never trust human witnesses, and that the key to all of this is actual scientific study and calibrated instruments and documentation. And that we're sort of, and to me, this is a part of why I think the government has never actually gotten anywhere close to solving this, because, you're never going to solve this by having a counterintelligence Air Force officer sit down on the other side of a table from a witness and say, like, can you point to the place in the sky that you saw the thing? And, was it this big or that big or that big? And, was it, like a 60-watt light bulb or a 1,000-watt light bulb? You're just never going to get the level of detail of these sightings from the sort of day-to-day witness gathering. But you could, with sort of a more scientific, instrument-based sort of study and approach to this subject that really figures out, again, ruling out, you said 1% of anomalies. It's probably not even 1% of anomalies. We're probably talking about, a tenth of 1% or 100th of 1% or, 100th of a tenth of a percent that end up being these sort of Lonnie Zamora moments. And it's only going to be when we sort of really identify what that corpus actually is that we can begin to think about like what those patterns are, what those possibilities actually are.
Yeah. All right. Last question. 75 years documented in 500 pages. 75 years from now, will there be that much more to write about? Or do you think this will go the way of the mystery of meteorite stones falling from the sky? How ridiculous is that? Or witchcraft or something like that. It'll just go away because we have explanations for almost everything.
I don't think we'll get the explanations in 75 years. To me, the sort of bigger question, sadly, is anyone going to be paying attention to this in 75 years? Because I think, one of the things that, and again, Avi Loeb has written about this. Toby Ord has written actually a great book about this, and sort of the existential threat to the human race. That, there are a lot of trends in our modern world that make me worried that we're going to be paying any attention to sort of big picture science in 75 years.
Wow.
And that's, that's a climate question. That's a misinformation question. That's a politics question. And, I think my sort of most immediate concern is, do we have the capability as an intelligent civilization to, both keep our civilization going and also to remain serious about inquiry and science in the decades ahead?
Wow, that's so interesting. I was not expecting that answer. So, yeah, existential threats are there for sure. Maybe the L in the Drake equation, the lifetime of a communicating civilization, is much shorter than a lot of the scientists thought.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. I hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too. I've got 2 young kids, and I've got a lot invested in a world still thriving 75 years from now.
All right, Garrett, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your book. I love the book. Again, get this book, read it. Get the audio book. It's a great read. All right.
Thanks so much. It was a great conversation.